As long as we have good sound, we should be fine. Does that help the sound quality at all? Okay.
America. Jim Hinckley's America. Say hello to a new friend on an old road. Take a two-lane trip of memories into mysteries unknown. Come along for the ride. Jim Hinckley's America. Jim Hinckley's America.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How are you doing today? Got a little something different we're doing. Andy, Michelle, everybody who's joined us so far. We're going to try a little bit different, a new kind of program, and it's a work in progress. And I always appreciate my guinea pigs and people who join in and critique and encourage and support. I'd like to thank Connie at the Wagon Wheel Motel in Cuba, Missouri, and City of Cuba Tourism for sponsoring today's endeavor. And what we're going to do this morning is a presentation. We're going to talk about the bicycle and its role in the creation of the American auto industry and Route 66. So let's see if we can make this happen and see what you think of this. The bicycle was crucial to the initial development of the automobile industry. And a lot of people don't realize, it's kind of interesting. Now we get upset with bicycles. We're putting bicycle lanes in, things of that nature. But bicycles had a key role in the creation of Route 66, perhaps the most famous highway in the world. In the late 19th century, Ransom E. Olds in the 1880s was experimenting with gas engines. Here we were dealing with Geronimo in the American Southwest, and yet bicycles soon became all the rage. And this is really a surprise to a lot of people, but Orville and Wilbur Wright, they began with bicycles. A lot of the early automakers, they began with bicycles. And by 1890, it was small. There was estimated about 40,000 bicycles. And we had an organization formed, the League of American Wheelmen. And this pioneering organization, to show you the growth in this, from 1890 to 1896, look at the leap. From 40,000 to 2,500,000 bicycle riders in the United States. And of course, this sparked a major transition. You had touring, resulting in development of a multi-billion-dollar business tour service industry. A League of American Wheelmen also had a chapter for women. And they were trying to encourage the movement for better roads, because good roads are needed for bicycle riding. They're needed for everybody. And of course, this sounds familiar because this gave rise to the Good Roads movement, which in turn paved the way for the United States automobile industry. Good afternoon, Uwe. Guten Abend. Or should I say Guten Tag? And then we also, what happens with the, by 1898, the bicycle had given way largely to the American auto industry. Orville and Wilbur Wright established a bicycle manufacturing company. Charles and Frank Duryea demonstrated their motor wagon in 1893. And to give you an idea how difficult automobiles were at that time, the first automobile race in the United States, 1895, vehicle driven 54 miles. And one of the drivers in this race collapsed from exhaustion, and he was a blacksmith, not exactly known as a wimp. The Barnum Bailey Circus gave a Duryea motor wagon top billing over the albino, the fat man, and the bearded lady. Montgomery Ward said, "This is a fad you should see before it passes." It was absolutely incredible how rapidly society was changing from the bicycle to the automobile. And of course, touring became a big thing of the time. Some of the leading industrialists, famous wealthy people, Vanderbilts and others, started organizing tours and rallies. And they called themselves automobilists. And they started taking over the roads, but the problem, of course, was that roads had evolved a little. And Alexander Winton found this out in 1901 when he attempted a cross-country trip from San Francisco and made it only as far as the far east side of the Sierra Nevada mountains before as the road just simply ceased to exist. But to give you an idea on the first decade of the auto industry, first decade of the 20th century, how rapidly things had changed. Jackson, Michigan would have 24 automobile manufacturers. Enid, Oklahoma even had a manufacturer. Almost every little small town in America had a manufacturing company. It became the new gold rush. automobiles and supplying automotive parts became the new gold rush. Everybody wanted on board. Leading manufacturers of all kinds of different things, pianos, shotguns, all jumped on the bandwagon to become automobile manufacturers. And just a quick snapshot, a microcosm, if you will, is the Jackson Automobile Company in Jackson, Michigan. Kind of gives you an idea how things evolved and changed with just one company. Now magnify that by literally thousands and thousands of companies. The Jackson was in business for quite a few years, and there's an interesting story behind this that applies to the modern industry. Ted Odell is reviving a Hackett automobile factory at this time in Jackson, Michigan, to chronicle the history of automobile production in Jackson. And then, as now, slogans were a big part of selling the automobile, selling the sizzle rather than the steak. We, of course, for us older folks, we remember Dinah Shore and "See the USA in your Chevrolet." What a great marketing campaign that was. But if you look at some of these early automotive slogans, you can see that they really symbolize the times. No hill too steep, no sand too deep. Made in the Carolinas, the quiet mile-a-minute car. Odd ones too, like made a little better than seems necessary. A common sense car with no delicate parts. And at changing times, we talk about today how we live in such dramatic societal evolution and change. Well, look what was taking place just from 1909 to 1930. And to give you an idea on some of the changes here, consider this. In 1909, there were several million horse-drawn vehicles produced, but less than a million automobiles. By 1929, that had totally reversed. There were less than 20,000 horse-drawn vehicles produced in 1929. And Hudson alone had one of their best years at 290,000 vehicles. John Tokum patented the self-measuring visible gas pump in 1901. So the entire support industry. And look at how they overlap in history and time. In 1909, Henry Ford introduced the Model T Ford, but yet the last stagecoach from Kingman, Arizona left in 1916. More people owned automobiles than had indoor plumbing. It was quite an amazing transitional period, and I find it extremely fascinating. The period 1885 to 1930. You think about this. Wyatt Earp was working in Los Angeles as a film consultant in the 1920s. When the Cactus Derby races took place in the American Southwest, 1909 to 1914, you had people that were Civil War veterans helping pull these cars out of the sand. And we have trouble today, especially us older folks. Sometimes we have trouble adjusting to the transitions, the changing times. Well, consider Ezra Meeker as an example of someone who saw incredible transition and lived to tell the tale and prospered and had grand adventures resultant of his ability to adapt. Starting out with his trip across the Oregon Trail in 1852 and then working on the first gas station in the Cajon Pass with his son in 1919. That's quite a little jump, a transition, if you will. A great pioneer in this whole episode was A.L. Westgard, a Norwegian immigrant. As you can see here, it's incredible what this fellow accomplished, mapping out automobile roads throughout the United States. And one of the roads he mapped was the Trail to Sunset from Chicago to Yuma. Interestingly enough, it had the same starting point as Route 66 would later have. And to put it in perspective about how insane this Westgard's trips were, sometimes 10 to 20,000 miles in a year. Several years after he made these trips, in 1915, Edsel Ford was quite happy. He noted in his journal that he drove from Williams to Kingman, arriving at midnight, 153 miles, and he considered it a good day's run. A big part of automobile promotion was endurance races and stock car races. And one of the more intriguing races of the period, especially for us folks here in the Southwest, was the Desert Classic, dubbed the Cactus Derby. Of particular interest is the 1914 race. It followed the National Old Trails Road from Los Angeles to Ash Fork and then south through Prescott down Yarnell Hill into Phoenix. And by that time, the races had attracted some very, very serious participation, including Louis Chevrolet and Barney Oldfield, two of the more famous names of the period. Of course, Louis Chevrolet went on to other things. He's kind of the namesake for a car you may recognize. And it's quite astounding when you look at the time. This was a timed race, what these people accomplished through basically trackless wilderness. Our first real highway, if you can call it a highway, designed for automobile traffic, was the Lincoln Highway that was dedicated in 1913. And this was a major change. It represented a dawning of a real new era in the American transportation history. And it still has a great popularity and following, but it never had the popularity in the press of Route 66. Following on the heels, basically, of the Lincoln Highway was the National Old Trails Road, which came into being. The idea was conceived in 1912, but it really didn't come into being until 1913. And originally, the National Old Trails Road, of course, it started back east in Maryland, but the Midwestern and Western section followed a lot of the trail to Sunset, down through New Mexico, and then dropping down from Albuquerque, from Las Vegas to Santa Fe, Albuquerque, Springerville, and down to Yuma. In 1913, Tom Devine and members of the Good Roads movement. Tom Devine was the father of Andy Devine and owner of the Beale Hotel in Kingman. And they attended the 1913 convention and petitioned for rerouting the National Old Trails Road across northern Arizona and through the deserts of California. And, of course, one of the great, they had two primary selling points on this. One, the railroad. When your car broke down, you could ship it home. And two, tourism, Grand Canyon, things of this nature. And, of course, breakdowns were quite common. In the book, By Motor to the Golden Gate, written by Emily Post, in 1916, her car croaked near in the deserts in Winslow Holbrook area, and so the car was shipped to California from that point. 1914, the Desert Classic race that I had mentioned, really attracted international headlines, and as a result, it put two things on the map in the consciousness of people: the joy and excitement and fun of road trips, and the National Old Trails Road and the tourism potential. And the Arizona Good Roads movement created a guidebook to Arizona shortly after this race. And it became very, very popular and started fueling a growing tourism industry along the National Old Trails Road in northern Arizona. And it, with Emily Post's adventure, as I mentioned before, you can see here, the best commentary on the road between Santa Fe and Albuquerque is that it took us less than 3 hours to make the 66 miles. As a little bit of a side note, this is a great read if you get a chance. And the book was published in 1916, but has been recently reprinted, and it is now available through Amazon.com.
Hello.
You can find this online and order a copy. It's really a great book, and I highly recommend this. Now, on my Patreon site, for exclusive content, what I did was reprint Edsel Ford's journal. That book is not been reprinted, but it's a great read. You can find that on our exclusive content section on our Patreon, which is our crowdfunding site. To give you an idea on the growth of tourism, take a look. This is from 1915 when Edsel Ford traveled the National Old Trails Road to California for the Panama Pacific Exposition. More than 20,000 people attended that event from outside the state, and they arrived by automobile. And you can see a copy there of the Arizona Good Roads illustrated book that I had mentioned previously. The National Old Trails Road started funneling more and more tourism and travel and creating a infrastructure for tourism. Now this section here is from Edsel Ford's journey to give you kind of an idea what they had to deal with. Now mind you, this was considered a highway at the time, and as you can see, it left a great deal to the imagination. Edsel's journal is very informative and details a lot of the troubles they had. Being wealthy kids, he was traveling with his college buddies, and he, of course, had a new Ford. Two of his friends picked up a Stutz in Indianapolis, and his other buddies had a new Cadillac V8. And the Model T and the Cadillac did fairly well. The Stutz, not so good. Now, Cyrus Avery, he is considered the father of Route 66. But he was much, much more than that. He was a pioneer all the way across the board in the Good Roads movement, creation of taxes, funding mechanisms for highway development, and he was instrumental in the creation of a uniform federal highway numbering system. He also was involved in other things like creation and patenting of highway equipment, road grading equipment, things of that nature. And of course, Route 66 was his primary achievement that he is now recognized for today. And if you get a chance in Tulsa, there's a great memorial to him along Route 66 on the Arkansas River. Well, Route 66 was commissioned in November 1926. It originally, in April of when the highway came into being, it was signed as US 60, and Cyrus Avery had negotiated a bit of a compromise with some political parties, and as a result, the highway was renumbered as US 66. And Route 66 is not our most scenic or our most historic highway, but it has always had the best press and the best publicity from its inception. Nat King Cole recording the song Get Your Kicks on Route 66. 1932, it was advertised as the highway to the Los Angeles Olympics. You had the TV show. You had Grapes of Wrath. By the way, this is the 80th anniversary of the Grapes of Wrath. And now we've come pretty much full circle. We're back to bicycles. The Adventure Cycling Association has now offered Route 66 maps. In the infancy of the American auto industry, electric vehicles dominated. It was easier in the Northeast to find a place to charge batteries than it was to find a place to purchase gasoline. In 2014, the world's first electric vehicle museum opened in Kingman, Arizona. Route 66 today has morphed into something almost magical. And bicycles are a key part of that as bicycle tourism increases in popularity along Route 66. But we've gone from the national era of the National Old Trails Road, Route 66, and what's interesting to keep in mind about Route 66, the most famous highway in the world doesn't exist. It was decertified back in 1985. And yet, people from all over the world celebrate Route 66. They travel Route 66. They plan for years and save their money to travel Route 66. And there again, increasingly, bicycles Route 66. This last year, I was privileged to have an opportunity to attend the second European Route 66 Festival in Zlin, the Czech Republic. And it was quite amazing. More than estimated about 20,000 people from 10 countries celebrating the United States, celebrating American music, celebrating American cars, and celebrating Route 66. Quite an adventure. Well, I hope you found this somewhat informative. It was a new endeavor, and something new we're experimenting with. Something new I'm going to be doing is different programs. No, Uvi, it is a very nice pickup truck, the green one. No, that was actually in Zlin, the Czech Republic. I want to thank you this morning for joining me on this program. I'll give a shout out to a couple of our sponsors. I mentioned Cuba, Missouri, and the Wagon Wheel Motel. We've got a couple other quick things we want to share with you. We'll be real brief. The 10 Minutes with Jim podcast is going strong, picking up in steam, and you can find that at Podbean, Jim Hinckley. It'll be posted Sunday morning, 8 o'clock. This was, like I say, today was a little bit rough, a little bit raw, but we're going to be doing more of these if you find them of interest. We'll be doing programs on Route 66 and tourism development and similar topics. And now, let's see what we can do here. Coming up, we're going to, a couple of things we've got on the schedule. I mentioned the podcast. This weekend, on the podcast, we talk about caverns on Route 66. Some great places to get pie, 200 feet underground. We also have been talking about Mitchell Caverns, Merrimack Caverns, some of the other caverns along Route 66. We've got a couple programs coming up about wineries and microbreweries on Route 66. And if you liked these presentation series, and like I say, this was a little rough. Like I say, I'm glad you guys were my guinea pigs. I really appreciate it, and I could use your input. But we'll be doing more of these on community development, tourism development work. We'll be. I've got plans to do a program about how to operate a Model T Ford, and so the Jim Hinckley's America network of programs is growing and growing exponentially. And take a look at Jim Hinckley's America website. It's a work in progress. It's doing a bit of changing, but it is moving along. Of course, a lot of this is supported through our crowdfunding initiative and of course, our sponsors. We have a new travel center page that we've added, and we are working towards sponsorship for a series of programs this fall. The idea is 21 days of interviews, 21 live programs on the road with the people who give Route 66 its vitality, make it special. We'd be visiting with Manny Mendelson on the Santa Monica Pier, Ian Bowen, Scott Pietrowski. We'd be talking with motel owners, business owners, David and Amanda Brenner. What we're hoping to bring that to fruition, and you can help on that, become our partner through crowdfunding. And of course, we're looking for sponsors, and we have great advertising opportunities now for people who want to get on board and sponsor Jim Hinckley's America. Hey, thank you for joining me today, Ruth Anna. It was really great to see you out and about. I hope you and John are doing well. Louise, good morning. Uvi, thank you. Andy, Michelle, and we will be seeing everybody on the road soon. And like I say, thank you for joining me this morning. Take care, my friends.